In 1992, the hit movie Aladdin was released, and adhering to a long-standing tradition up to this time, a movie tie-in game was expected for all the major consoles. Like today, movie tie-ins were not a guaranteed success, but both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis had enjoyed some critical success for their Disney games released on their platforms. To develop the movie tie-in for the Super Nintendo, Nintendo went with a longtime partner, Capcom, and the game they developed is a fun, traditional platform game that mechanically is arguably better game than the Genesis one. But Sega eventually settled on Virgin Interactive after some initial hiccups. You might wonder why I'm telling you all this in reference to Donkey Kong Country. To bring the game to life, Virgin Interactive worked directly with Disney animators to animate the frames of each and every character. The ink and paper drawings were then digitized and used in the game directly, creating the most convincing screen-to-game transition ever seen in a video game. It did not matter that the Capcom game was arguably better in a lot of respects. Sega's Aladdin went on to be one of the best-selling games on the Genesis, with a whopping 4 million copies sold worldwide. By comparison, the Super Nintendo version sold 1.8 million, which is not shabby, but when comparing the games, many reviewers at the time said the Super Nintendo copy looked dated and it didn't have a sword. This embarrassed Nintendo. They wanted to strike back. In preparation for the Nintendo 64, Rare, a longtime Nintendo development partner, purchased Silicon Graphics stations. They discovered that they could develop games for the Super Nintendo on the hardware using pre-rendered graphics. Rare test developed several titles using this technology, and Nintendo saw the process and was impressed on a routine trip to England. Rare was given permission to develop a platform game using the long-dormant Donkey Kong franchise. The goal was to release the game for Thanksgiving of 1994 and prove that anything Sega could do, Nintendo could do better. And thus was born one of the greatest platform games of all time, a game that impressed the world and sold over 9 million copies. As the world transitioned to a 32-bit generation of consoles, the Super Nintendo proved it could still compete while everyone waited for the next generation Nintendo console. To tide people over, a sequel was greenlit that would eventually extend to a trilogy. All 3 games are fondly remembered, though 3 less so due to its late release mainly. But anybody familiar with this series of videos knows that it's not about the history. Here we ask the big question: which of these 3 phenomenal games is the best? The other question is, how do we determine such a thing outside of nostalgia and historical value? Our last 2 competitions were both in the adventure game genre, so not all of our metrics from previous videos will be applicable here, although some will. So, how do I determine which criteria to use? Consulting different sources, I came up with a list of defining features of the platform genre and combined them with the still applicable criteria from our previous competitions. I think that's enough preamble. Let's see what game reigns supreme objectively. I know I have my personal favorite, although in the past that has not always been the game that won the competition. For example, in the last video, my favorite of the 3 actually came in last. Yikes. Scoring will carry over from previous videos, with the winner receiving 5 points, second place 3, and last a single point. In the final round, if a clear winner cannot be determined easily, double points will be awarded as no ties are allowed. Okay, let's dive in. Since all 3 games were made essentially in the same way, it might be difficult to determine a clear winner. True improvements were made in the sequels compared to the original, but you cannot discount the cutting edge that Donkey Kong Country represents at the time. Or maybe you can. After all, while the use of Silicon Graphics was new and revolutionary for the game industry, it was not in and of itself a new technology. Even utilizing digitized assets has been done before. Now, before you get angry, I do want to point out, though, that it takes a lot of innovation to pull these 2 techniques together. That's the real genius to Donkey Kong Country. To take 2 cutting-edge technologies and use them together in a brand new and exciting way. In addition to this was the crunch that Rare imposed on themselves to bring the new tech to life, working 12 to 16-hour days to bring such an achievement to consoles in months, not years. It annihilated the competition in sales and brought an aged and forgotten mascot back to life in a way that is still being felt and celebrated to this day. All three of these games pushed the boundaries of what the Super Nintendo could still do late in its life cycle. But of the three, only one paved the way forward for not just the others, but for a visual style that would carry into the future for games as well, even in the 32-bit and 64-bit generations. As for runner-up, that's a bit more difficult for me to choose. This may be a controversial pick, but I think 3 is more impressive technically for a couple of reasons. First, the presentation is by far the clearest and the brightest. Personally, I prefer the aesthetic of Donkey Kong Country 2, but the variety is much higher in 3 than any other game in the trilogy. This is made all the more impressive when you consider that most of the team was new to the projects. Lacking the experience gathered from programming previous entries, it's impressive that they were able to turn out such a consistent end product. An important metric for any Nintendo game in general, Nintendo has always prioritized the broadest appeal possible. Oftentimes, the accessibility is criticized by saying it makes games too easy, but none of these three games come across as baby's first platformer. That said, Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 do ramp up the difficulty and complexity appropriately, considering they are sequels, meaning that in essence, being the first game in a series has inherent advantages in that being less complex, it has broader appeal. This extends to its choice of cast as well. While I love the combination of Diddy and Dixie Kong, personally, and I have mixed feelings about Kiddy Kong, there is a reason that most Donkey Kong-related titles have featured Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong as the headliner, if not both of them. The bottom line is the two characters complement each other really well. Between 2 and 3, 2 is designed in much more straightforward fashion. 3 leans into a more adventure-style progression, which has its own strengths, but it will naturally be less approachable to some players. All three games have excellent level design, but the inexperience of the new team shines through in Donkey Kong Country 3. The original one is a strong start, but there are times you can feel the crunch from the tight development cycles. 2 is the pinnacle of the series, inspiring the levels in 3 and perfecting the levels in the original. The variety and complexity of the design and gimmicks on display are industry standards and have been iterated on but rarely surpassed by any 2D platformer since. By consistency, I mean which game remains the most engaging throughout, from start to finish. While I feel the overall quality of Donkey Kong Country 2 is higher than its predecessor, I do not think that the game nor its follow-up are always consistently engaging. It's very rare, but some of the mechanics and levels can be frustrating in that they arrest control away from the player. Also, some of the levels are a bit too long in both of the sequels. Sometimes there can be extended segments, which can be especially punishing if the player does not finish the level or make it to a checkpoint. This is rarely an issue in the original game, and as such it remains the most consistent throughout. Consistency is a funny thing though. Sometimes it's important to take risks in order to avoid being repetitive or boring. But Donkey Kong Country does not fall into the trap either due to its shorter length. All three games have similar, excellent movement. Donkey Kong Country 3, however, struggles a little due to the hurt boxes on Kiddy being a little too large to accommodate some of the stage hazards. I have no complaints about Donkey Kong from the original, His momentum is slightly slower than Diddy's, which makes sense based on his build, and the level obstacles are designed around his movement and size, so everything just fits. However, Dixie's flutter is a stroke of genius, and combined with Diddy's speed and tighter platforming afforded by their combined size, the movement is just phenomenal in this game. Easily a contender for some of the best movement in a 2D game ever. Since the main type of power-up in the game is the Animal Buddy system, we'll focus on that, although I am aware that there are a few others. The implementation of the mechanic is pretty consistent across all three games. Rambi, a standout favorite and arguably the best one, is missing from 3, and a lot of people really do not like Ellie, Rambi's apparent replacement, labeling her as the worst buddy of the 3. But Ellie is not the worst buddy in the series. Glimmer is. Glimmer might actually be responsible for killing some people. And if you have epilepsy, you need to avoid the levels that feature this character. I could tell you what my favorite ones are, Squawks and On Guard, but that's hardly the objective metric that I'm going for. So how do we proceed? At the end of the day, what they do is secondary to how they are used in the levels. You can have a bad Rambi level and a good Ellie one. Not Glimmer though, yeah. The facts are that variety is important, and Donkey Kong Country 2 has more buddies and levels that feature them than the other two. I do not think Donkey Kong Country can win this round. While the game is consistently amazing throughout, and the final boss is definitely a real showstopper, most of the end-level bosses are functional but not amazing, and some of them are just plain palette swaps of other bosses. Likely another sign of the rushed development, it is clear that Donkey Kong Country cannot be the winner in this category. Every fiber of me wants to give this to 2. I love that the island and bosses are pirate-themed, and the fights are fun and mostly engaging. But this is the toughest category for me to be objective in, if I'm honest. I do think that 3 has some very ambitious concepts for its bosses, even if at times it fails in its execution. The Snowman boss, Barbas, Baron, K. Rulenstein, all show a lot of creativity, and the payoff for completing the game with all the Banana Birds is arguably one of the best payoffs in the series. I do feel like Donkey Kong Country 2 is more consistent though, while 3 is more creative and inventive, as I've already said. So which is better? Consistent and safe? Creative or daring? What I need is to make a tier list, but I suppose that is more subjective as well, now that I think about it. I did not expect this to be the hardest part of the video, and the truth is, it's not even going to affect the outcome. Donkey Kong Country 2 is going to win no matter what I pick, and 3 won't even break second if it comes in first. Okay, I want to be clear, this is not a mercy pick. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I prefer the bosses in Donkey Kong Country 2, and they may arguably be better in many respects, but the bosses in 3 are its best addition to the franchise, especially when combined with the Banana Bird quest. It's emblematic of the fights in general, as all the bosses are events. Most of them are pretty tough and intimidating challenges, hurdles to overcome, which is what a boss is supposed to be after all, and they fill that role well. Of course, Donkey Kong Country 2 comes out on top overall, with DKC coming in second and Donkey Kong Country 3 coming in third. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this lighthearted comparison of these 3 games that most people probably could have predicted the answer for, but I like that we went through and sort of objectively looked at it. And I love all 3 of these games. DKC2 is my favorite personally, but if that's not true for you, please let me know in the comments how you would have rated each one of these categories and what your final score would have looked like. Don't forget to also like the video if you enjoyed it, Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, as we tend to have these videos fairly often. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.